My one experience with LSD was absolutely life-changing. It was terrifying, and it was done exactly the wrong way. Meditation and music, the arts in one form or another, I just began to see those as essential nutrients.
Hi, this is Kevin from Meditation Magazine, and I'm here with Dr. Jill Stein. Thank you so much for joining us today. Jill, thank you for being here.
My honor, Kevin. Good to be with you.
I just want to introduce Dr. Stein, or Jill, to our audience today, because I think that she should be more well-known than she is. I think she is the most popular third-party candidate in the United States, I believe. And I think that you've won the most votes out of any third-party candidate in probably the past few elections, right? Is that about right?
The numbers go up and down, but we're definitely the number one vote getter in this election.
Yeah. So, most people think that there's just Democrats and Republicans. You can either vote for Trump or Biden. The truth is that there are third parties out there. The Green Party is one of my favorites. I would say probably my favorite third party. I actually have voted Green Party in the past. This last election, I was in Florida in a swing state. I decided to vote for Kamala because I just wanted to make sure to try to stop Trump from winning. That was my personal choice. But I have voted for Dr. Stein in the past. And I really appreciate what she does. And the reason that I really like Dr. Stein, and thank you so much for being here, is because of the positions that she takes and the strong stands, the morally principled stands that she takes on so many issues that I really agree with on most of these issues. So, for example, universal health care. Jill describes this as healthcare as a right, as a human right. I believe it is a right. I think that we should have universal health care. I'm really sad that we don't. I would like to get into that a little bit during our conversation. Dr. Stein also is a very strong advocate for stopping the emergency of climate change, and even takes some very strong positions on social justice, like reparations, that we should pay reparations for what African Americans have gone through in this country. Ending war, obviously, always a good thing, in my opinion anyway. Maybe not in Raytheon's opinion or some of these other big companies, but I believe we should end war. And I believe you also have campaigned for legalizing cannabis, as far as I remember. Is that right? Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So, and I totally agree with that. I think we should have full autonomy of what we ingest and how we use our minds. And so most of the things that Jill represents, I very much agree with. Some of them, I'm a little on the fence, or sometimes I disagree with certain positions. I think that that's pretty natural. It's very hard to agree with somebody 100% on everything all the time. And I think that that's what's great about these conversations, is that we can have a deep conversation and a respectful conversation and get into some of the things that we agree with, and so get into some of the things that we disagree with, and try to represent what it can look like when people can be respectful of each other and kind toward each other, and without fighting about the things that they disagree with, which I think is such an important thing in today's super polarized climate. What do you think, Dr. Stein, or Jill? Sorry, I'm just getting used to Jill.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I would just add that I feel not just hopeful, but I would say confident. I feel really confident that humanity asserts itself when we have the opportunity to actually communicate. And we live in we live in a polarized society because we live in an economically polarized society. There's this old saying from a famous Supreme Court Justice, Louis Brandeis, from a ways back. And that was that in this country, we have a choice between vast concentrations of wealth or democracy. And we've unfortunately, I can't say we've chosen the former rather than the latter. It's been chosen for us and was kind of written into some of the founding structures of this country, some of which were terrific and some of which were, really problematic, like the genocide that we committed against indigenous people, and then again in bringing African Americans here to basically build the country. Um, so we have incredible historic levels of disparity, which are only getting worse. And unfortunately, those translate into political influence. But what I have experienced over and over in my many decades of uh, social and political activism is that when we actually have a chance to freely communicate, that we can overcome that. And we do over and over. Like, for example, the resistance to the war in Vietnam, or resistance to the progress of labor and the 40-hour week and child labor laws. All it takes is enabling this conversation for us to become empowered, discover our universe of agreement and our unstoppable power together when we have a chance to actually have that conversation. And so much of where we are right now, I think, is because we're stuck. The channels of communication have become monopolized. And so it's the exception that we have the opportunity to talk here. There was more money spent to suppress our campaign by actually the Democrats in their war room, who were very threatened by the fact that we actually do what we say. We don't just say it, we actually do it. And we have a track record of integrity, and also to get the money out of politics so that we can do this not as an exception, but really as the rule, and, open media and debates and things like that. It's not rocket science how to reclaim our democracy and then reclaim our future. If we don't do that, we don't have a future. And,
Yeah.
that's a very
Yeah.
motivating factor right now.
Yeah, for sure. I want to get into reclaiming our democracy later in this conversation and see what your thoughts are on that. But first, I want to say that, I think that to have really deep conversations, and not just deep conversations, but also really productive conversations where we can really kind of reflect on our own views, our own thought processes, and understand where we're coming from, understand how we know the things that we know. To have those types of deep conversations that I think are necessary for this country, one of the best ways that I know of, probably the best way that I know of to do that, is to practice meditation. And so I want to start our conversation with a little bit of meditation. And I'll just, for the viewers, I just like to explain briefly why I think this is so important. When we get lost in our thoughts, and when we get lost in the media streams that are coming into our minds from the television or social media or all that, all these racing, spinning thoughts, they spin around in our minds like a whirlwind, and it can be difficult to see through sort of the cloudy fog, the haze. It can also really amp up our emotions, where we get very angry or upset, and that can also cloud our thoughts and cloud our clarity. But when we practice meditation, we can just let some of those things go. We can let the thoughts pass through our minds without holding on to them, without going down a rabbit hole. We can let everything flow in this moment and just allow our minds to settle down and calm down. And when we do that, when the mind is moving a little slower, when it's a little clearer from all the spinning thoughts, then we're able to see more clearly the reality beneath all of the chaos and thoughts and beliefs. So that's why I'd like to start with a brief meditation, maybe for a 3-minute silent meditation that I'll just pop in and guide a little bit, if that's okay, Jill. Yes.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm just going to put myself on full screen for a sec. And so what we're going to do is just breathe in and breathe out, just watching the breath, just observing how the breath flows in and out of the body. Noticing if you feel the air flowing into your nostrils and flowing out of your nostrils. Noticing if you feel the torso inflating and deflating with the inhales and exhales. Noticing if any thoughts come up that try to distract you or pull you away from the breath. Letting those thoughts go and just staying centered in the breath. Anytime you notice that you lost awareness of the breath, just bring the mind back with a smile. And as we rest in this still, quiet place, remaining aware of the breath, we can bring our attention back to the entire body, being aware of everything from the tips of the toes to the top of the head. Just feeling what it feels like to be alive in this moment, in this body. And bringing the attention to the eyelids, the orange light on the inside of the eyelids, the light that permeates the eyelids. Remaining aware of the breath in the body, we can allow the eyelids to drift gently open whenever you're ready. And remaining aware of the body, being here together, even with the eyes open, we can have a meditative conversation. Thank you, Jill. Thank you for practicing with me for this moment.
Thank you, Kevin. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. So, what came up for you in that meditation? Did you find it was very easy to stay silent in the breath, or did you find thoughts coming up in the mind?
My cat insisted on participating, so I would feel this, his soft presence in my face. But other than that, it felt very good to just kind of take a rest and breathe and be very focused on breath.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes just taking a break for your mind that rest can allow you to think more clearly.
Oh, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Did any thoughts come up of things that you wanted to talk about, or anything that was sort of popping up that you were letting go, or going down any rabbit holes?
I was really indulging in the moment, of just being present and not having to think about how to wrestle with our very, um, dire reality at the moment. And it felt really
Yes.
good to back off.
Yeah.
Um,
Because sometimes we do have to go into the world and try to deal with the situation, especially when it's as destructive and problematic as what the situation is right now in this world. But sometimes if we just, I think if we do that all the time and we only do that, then we kind of lose sight of our peace and our love and our heart. When we just focus on that, on the action all the time, then we can get really stressed, and that stress can contribute sometimes to the fighting in society. So what I try to do is I try to be in this peaceful place and take action from there. And I want to get more into that. Actually, maybe right now is a good time. I wanted to ask you a little bit about if you have any background with meditation, mindfulness. I know that you had mentioned that you do some mantras sometimes and that you had practiced some silent meditation, but can you tell me a little bit about like your experiences with meditation and this type of contemplative spirituality in the past?
So it started really early for me. I was really fortunate to have been, taken on a vacation with my grandparents, like when I was around 8 or 9 years old, to a hotel in Florida, in
Mm,
Miami Beach, where I attended a yoga class, and I got completely hooked on yoga, physical hatha yoga. But part of that was having a meditative space. And so I'd say that's where it started for me. And that became a daily practice when I was maybe 8 or 9 or 10 years old, whatever it was. It was just something that made so much sense to me. And this was kind of the message of the teacher. And, that really got integrated into my DNA at a very early age. I was also, in a family that thought everybody should grow up playing a musical instrument. So I learned how to play guitar and then later piano. And music also became a really critical meditative space and a space of renewal for me. So those two things really became kind of foundational. And one other thing I'll add, I went to actually dig this out last night because I hadn't looked at it in probably 40 years, which was my undergraduate thesis
mm,
on the so-called psychophysiology of meditation. That is
mm.
like, what is the mind-body connection? And the thesis, I had to like reread it to remember what the details were, but um, I actually studied practitioners of transcendental meditation and compared them with controls on just the reactivity of what was a common indicator at that time. This was back in the 1970s, so there wasn't a lot known about this, but it was known that you could measure attention in part through what's called a galvanic skin response, which is basically the electrical conductivity of the skin. And you can mention how people either pay attention or they are not distracted. And it was very interesting because there was actually a finding, which was sort of unusual because it wasn't a big study. So it's really hard to see things in small studies. But there was an actual finding that the people who practiced meditation were uh, they were much more cooled out, you could say, in terms of their skin responses to just sort of neutral type sounds and stimuli around them. That even without meditating, just in their normal state, they were decidedly different from the controls, who were all people who wanted to learn meditation, but who had not yet been trained, in theory, controlling some of the other, contributors to differences between these groups. So at any
Wow.
rate, I
That's
was very.
fascinating to me. I just wanted to poke in. I think I've seen that study. I definitely, I maybe there were a lot of studies about skin conductivity in meditators, but the one that you just described, I remember a study like that. I don't know if it was yours or if it was a different one, but that's pretty amazing that you were at the forefront of meditation research back in the 70s. I didn't know that. That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, it was really very compelling to me. And I thought, that this was a really important tool for, addressing everything, our own, being present in ourselves and in the world around us. And so, yeah, I mean, that's a point of view that I still very much share. And though I do not have a daily meditation practice, I try to bring that mindfulness, into everyday waking space as much as possible.
Yeah, that's awesome. And how do you feel that it affects your life and your career and your action in the world?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like as someone who's practiced yoga almost every day of my life, starting from a very young age, and then having learned meditation and music and and the arts in one form or another, I just began to see those as essential nutrients of not just my own life, but really larger social sphere, and really respect these practices as really important features. And it's the lack thereof in our modern day society, where it's so much, just about everything has been commodified and corporatized and sterilized. And so we don't have kind of this spiritual glue internally and between us. And that's really critical. And I don't think there's any fixing this without also having those kind of art, music, spiritual practices that help knit us together.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So you're seeing meditation and all these practices as things that can connect us as humans and bring more unity in our country. And also you were describing them as nutrients, for your own life. Do you feel like your practice of meditation and spirituality has affected your capacity for empathy, for compassion, and your views on political subjects?
And let me just add also that, I think that the arts uh, actively uh, participating in the arts, and expressing the arts, or discovering, your own art from moment to moment, whether you're doodling in a picture, or you're doodling on the piano. I feel like art is very much a meditation too, as is dance. Um, I grew up actually, in the 60s, where folk music and hootenannies were a big thing. And my neighbor across the street would have a so-called hootenanny every Friday night, with people coming to play banjos and guitars and music, and it was really foundational for me. And I, you know, in my own development, yeah, I mean, absolutely, I tend to. Uh, it's just much smoother sailing for me if I have art or music or meditation, as an active part of my life. So, is there like an instance? It's like it's been so much part of my life from the start. It's hard for me to separate out like where I don't have it. And yeah, I mean, on the thing about empathy, I think when you're sharing a practice of art or meditation or religious ritual of any sort, I think that is extremely bonding. And it's really important for us to employ art and music and food and dance and ritual and spiritual practices. It's really important that we employ them in a way that uh, actively brings us together and helps us bond with our fellow human beings, especially where those bonds are not widely recognized.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that beyond, practicing together, I think sometimes just when we practice meditation, we, when all the thoughts calm down, then we can see more clearly of what's right in front of us, which is, other people. We're able to see into the eyes of another person, where it's, instead of being clouded by the thoughts that are in front of our eyes. And I think that it can increase empathy in that way and compassion in that way. I know that when I'm really caught up in thoughts, for example, and um, I'm just in my own world, I can lose empathy for the people around me, and I can snap at people, or I can be disgruntled or grumpy, or abrasive. And when I'm really present and I can really see in the eyes of another person, then there's more of an awareness of their emotions. There's more of an awareness of their thoughts and feelings and their needs. And I'm able to respond better. I'm able to respond with more empathy and compassion. And I wonder if have you ever experienced that or noticed that type of thing?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, all the time,
Mm.
that, yeah. I mean, if I am feeling overwhelmed, if I'm feeling helpless, if I'm feeling like, oh my God, how can we even, you know, how can we even pretend to try to work our way out of these crises that are really closing in on us? Then I feel like I've got to like reach for the keyboard, or,
Yeah,
for my guitar or something, just to kind of like plug in to what regenerates me, and then I can kind of get back on a more
yeah,
even keel,
yeah,
because how we cope with each other is just it's really fundamental. It's really foundational. There's nothing more important.
yeah, absolutely. When you're talking about growing up in the 60s and resonating with meditation and music, I'm just wondering, like, I don't know if I've seen you talk about it anywhere, but did you like resonate with the hippie movement that was burgeoning at that time?
For sure, I think anybody who was interested in the Beatles, or culture at that time, it was not something that's disparaged like it is now. Hippie is like frivolous and fly by night. And at the time, it wasn't. It was kind of a deep exploration of community. And I think, there were definitely, it had its downsides, but it was transformative, and it was very connected to the anti-war movement and to flower power, and putting flowers into the rifles of the National Guard. And, there were just, it was, and meditation was a very big part of that. Uh, you know, it's unfortunate how many of those lessons just got left behind quickly.
Yeah, I
And
wonder if partly the reason for that was government and media and corporations fearing the sort of revolution of consciousness and the hippie movement, and maybe kind of shut it down in the way that they shut down, for example, people like you, because they fear that it's going to interfere with their power. I don't know. Do you think that that happened?
sure, absolutely. I mean, for me, that's the presumption, that, corporate media, and it wasn't as corporatized back then, hardly as it is now, but there are very powerful forces of empire and oligarchy working through mainstream media. And to me, that is, it's like the counterpart of being internally aware and having a meditative mindset and being present in the moment. The other side of that is really having a very active engagement with the world around you, um, and understanding, and really grappling with what are these forces that are propagandizing us really 24/7.
Yeah.
And they are not friendly to, peace, justice, democracy, and survival of the planet. They're not. And they are in the process of kind of taking us down or trying to take us down. They are
Mm.
not succeeding. As they would put it, they're winning hands down. But actually, if you kind of really delve into the numbers and the polls and the trends, they're not winning. They're actually losing. And there's a real uprising of people power now going on in this country and around the world. And there is every reason to be, I think, very optimistic and determined and hopeful. But you have to have a deep underlying skepticism of these messages of hopelessness and futility that surround us by design. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, always, to me, the media has to be proven right, or the conventional mythologies out there. You have to assume that they are the product of this very corporatized world that we live in, and they should be rejected out of hand. There may be truths there, but they should, the burden of proof is really on them.
Yeah,
It's
I want to
journalism
get I
to
want to get
destroy.
more into I want to get more into media propaganda and disinformation in a little bit. But I want to stick to this interesting concept right now about the hippie movement getting shut down, and how it's gone out of style. I recently watched. I always try to watch people that I disagree with more than people that I agree with, because I want to expand my mind and my perspective and understand others. So I watched this video with Jordan Peterson interviewing Peter Thiel, which was only maybe a couple of weeks ago that happened.
Yes.
And Peter Thiel was focused in that conversation very much on talking about how the hippies basically ruined America. And his perspective was very interesting to me, which he actually kind of understood that the hippie movement was about looking inside and about, like, understanding ourselves, and going on what he called like internal journeys, or doing internal work. And he saw this as a distraction from external work, doing things in the world of what he called the world of atoms. And I wonder, I don't know, I wonder if there's any wisdom to that, whether there's something maybe that we should balance, not just the internal, but also balance it with the external work. I think that either extreme maybe is not good, going only inside or only outside. But I feel maybe a balance is what's needed.
Absolutely. I mean, you can see it as kind of like a yin yang thing, and you cannot live by one principle alone. And to me, that's absolutely essential. You have to find kind of your inner strength in order to deal with the world around you. In order to deal thoughtfully and productively with the world around you. Otherwise, you're just kind of a tool of these nefarious forces that are attempting to hijack humanity like we're robots. And Peter Thiel, I think you could say, is sort of an emblem of that, in
Mm.
more ways than one. And that's extremely dangerous. We are, on the verge of nuclear war. In many fronts around the world, closer than we have ever been. According to the Bulletin of Nuclear Scientists, we are, whatever it is, it may be like 30 seconds, from midnight. It's the closest we have ever been, including, the so-called Cuban Missile Crisis back in the early
Yeah,
60s. I think it
we
was.
got to do something about that. Maybe we have to make some peace in this world, and maybe diplomacy rather than such aggressive posturing in the um, in our international relations.
Which
And
I
we'll.
understand is kind of Peter Thiel's, perspective on this. So he
Mm,
sort of exemplifies, I think, the incredible danger of this sort of maniacal, don't dare, look internally, don't dare examine your own motives, your own conflicts of interest, and all the rest. Yeah, it's absolutely essential, and there has to be a balance. You know, um, I don't know that it was. Certainly the hippie movement is critiqued as having been navel gazing. To the exclusion of everything else. That wasn't kind of what I saw. I really saw it as the counterpart of anti-war activism and environmental activism, and it seemed to go together. I think it's really been disparaged, um,
yeah,
kind of
I, I
people.
I think it's probably it's. I have a feeling, besides the people like Peter Thiel who actually have some kind of um, a philosophical disagreement, I think that there is like actual suppression of it from government sources, because and like you were mentioning before, when you can see through the propaganda, then their lies don't work anymore. And I think that that's kind of scary to the people in power, or at least threatening in a certain way. Um, where I think that I can understand why people in power would try to suppress that type of clear-headed consciousness. But I think that over time, we'll eventually find our way to some kind of balance of the internal and the external, the world of consciousness and the world of atoms, or whatever you want to call it. And I want to get into some policy things for a moment, and talk about some interesting issues. I just want to let any viewers know that since we're live right now, you can feel free to make comments, and if you have questions or anything, we love to hear from you, and maybe we'll even bring some of your questions in toward the end. So one policy that sort of flows from this that we're talking about is the cannabis policy. And I link cannabis policy with psychedelic policy. Cannabis is actually a psychedelic. It's classified as a psychedelic. To me, psychedelics are part and parcel of the sort of movement of consciousness, the consciousness movement, where we are trying to understand ourselves and also be able to have a clear vision of what the world is and reality is. So I know that you've been vocal about cannabis legalization. I don't remember if you've spoken out about psychedelics. Do you feel that psychedelics should be legal?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think psychedelics are another, really powerful tool for promoting inner peace and outer peace. Um, I think it's important that psychedelics be handled, you know, not thoughtlessly, like the way that the hippie movement treated psychedelics and LSD back in the
Mm.
day was really dangerous and rather reckless. So, I think it's important that we learn from that. But the policies that I've seen, that have proposed advancing legalization of psychedelics really take those lessons very much to heart and are working with professional, um, psychologists and sociologists and so on for the proper framing of the use of this really powerful tool. Yeah, it almost passed in Massachusetts. There was, I don't really understand what happened that got in the way of that, but I think there are really important movements forward. It's huge.
Mm.
And, I have many friends and relatives in the field of psychology who are just ecstatic about the potential for psychedelics to really help lots of people,
Yeah, I
including
know that it's
normal people too, people who don't
yeah.
have a diagnosis, but also people with diagnoses like PTSD, for example. It's huge what psychedelics can do.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that it's become legal or decriminalized in a couple of places. I believe Washington D.C. it's decriminalized, and
Hmm.
Oregon it's or Washington I believe it's Oregon. You're able to go to a mushroom or psilocybin psychologists and legally be able to experience that. I think that's a great way to do it, like in a psychologist's office and a therapy setting that
Mhm.
can be really helpful and reduce a lot of the worries that people have about psychedelics. But do you think that psychedelics are illegal because of the worries that people have about safety and things like that, or do you think it's illegal for another reason?
I think corporations are generally the drivers of policy in the world that we live in, especially in the USA. And I think that there are enormous economic forces which are very threatened by the potential of a substance that you cannot put a patent on
Mm.
to be a really powerful tool. And there are, there are powerful forces out there. And I haven't studied this, so I don't have the evidence at hand, but I think one would assume that there are very powerful, big pharma forces here that don't want to see this move forward.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one factor. And I think another factor is perhaps the same thing that the hippie movement was shut down for was the media went against the hippie movement because the corporations and the government were against the hippie movement because these meditation and psychedelics and stuff like that can help you see through their lies and their bullshit. Sorry to use that word, their propaganda.
Yeah.
And I think that that's probably, to me, uh, one of the main reasons why it was shut down. I'm seeing there's a lot of comments coming in, and I just wanted to respond. Yes, we will respond to questions probably toward the end of the conversation. I did see some questions, and we will get back to them soon. Somebody asked, "Is she like Bernie Sanders?" I don't know. Actually, it's an interesting question. You could maybe just comment on that for a moment if you want to.
Uh, yeah, I mean, in many ways, I think we are more alike than we are different. I think what's different is that I don't think we're going to get change in, inside of billionaire sponsored political parties. I think political independence is absolutely essential. So, I'd say that's kind of where we differ. I don't think you can have a revolution inside of a counter-revolutionary party. I very much support what Bernie Sanders is talking about, but the fact that he's in a framework that is the Democratic Party, which is basically bought and paid for, and which has sabotaged him over and over again. So I think it's important not to be sheepdogged back into the same old scam, political
Yeah.
scam.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Jill. I actually,
We do have some other differences as well. I will call a genocide, and I cannot vote for genocide, period. And as a Jew, I am compelled to speak out because it wasn't supposed to happen again. And I grew up after the Holocaust, and never allowing this to happen again was really important to me, like critical to me and my community emerging from the Holocaust. And so I take that really seriously, and am just not able to look away from what's happening. And
yeah.
it's fixable. It's readily fixable.
Yeah,
So
thank you, Jill. I also Jewish and grew up in a Jewish school, and I also was taught never again. And maybe we'll get more into that in the international relations part toward the later in the conversation. And I see more questions coming in. I'll just say we'll get to these questions at the end of the interview, and if we have time, I think we will have some time for questions at the end.
great.
So on the topic of psychedelics and cannabis, I don't know if you would be comfortable talking about it, but do you have any experience with these things?
Yes,
Mm,
not a lot, because I didn't have a good experience. I mean, I
mm,
had an amazing, powerful experience, but it didn't make me wanna repeat it.
mm,
A very difficult experience. So, uh, I don't react to, foreign substances very well, and the same is true, actually with cannabis. I just don't do well. I kinda go to sleep, with
yeah,
cannabis, or get a headache, and yeah, so I'm not one that, I'm not looking to, uh, make it legal for myself, but I think these are really important, social tools, and I would say my one experience with LSD was absolutely life-changing. It was terrifying, and it was done exactly the wrong way, kind of on an impulse in a very, like walking around in the public, and, it was not a managed, uh, you know, nuclear it was a nuclear device that was not well applied or managed, and, my experience was a good example of how you don't wanna do this, which is why I think it's really important that it be properly used. But that experience so opened me up to many things, especially art-wise, and yeah, more art, I would say, than music. But, it was a very, um, hallucinogenic experience all the way through, and I completely lost, any sense of perspective on what was going on, and it was really extremely terrifying, but also wondrous, incredibly wonderful. So, yeah,
yeah.
I've definitely had experience and appreciate the power of these tools.
That sounds like it was a very intense experience. I've had some good trips, some bad trips. It sounds like you had something in between, maybe. Maybe there was some very terrifying and dark parts, but maybe there was some deep insights as well. Do you remember what kind of insights you had that and like how they changed your life?
Well, it's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, I came out of that and I was depressed for, I think, months. And I think part of it was just being in a bad relationship at the time. And that was really very real to me. While on the trip, I felt like I was a prisoner. And I thought I was a prisoner, actually. I was
Mm,
locked in an insane asylum and I was catatonic.
wow.
That was kind of my vision of things. And it took
Mm,
me quite a while to sort of process that and move away from that relationship. And it made me want to be an actor. I was sort of the ultimate, passive, um, human being, on that journey. I was sort of the ultimate. I was catatonic. I was locked up in a mental hospital. It was the ultimate catatonic, non-active experience. And so it made me really want to, be an actor in the world. And, I found that my meditation experience actually charged up my battery for activism as well. And it was very similar coming out of that trip, although I experienced, just beauty, visual beauty of the natural world in, a really powerful way, which is pretty typical. I was very, it was ecstatic to observe the beauty of things, but it just really made me want to be liberated, to be an actor to help protect the beauty of things, which I felt was being destroyed. I didn't see that so much as a part of that journey, but that was part of my larger kind of awakening at the time, seeing things being destroyed in the Vietnam War, in the environmental movement, especially.
Wow, that's very powerful. So you could say it kind of was a part of a motivating factor or an impetus for where you are now, getting into politics, doing all these things that you're doing. I know you
Yeah.
were a doctor. You were a doctor. I don't know if you were a doctor when you had that trip or after, but I clearly you have some kind of drive and motivation that goes beyond what most people have to become a doctor and then to choose to go into politics. Was that trip while you were a doctor or before you were a doctor?
It was before, and it really helped me focus and want to to want to be an actor and not to be sort of overwhelmed by, uh, the sense of struggle and misery, not to be trapped by that and to want to fight back.
Hmm. Yeah, that's amazing. And do you feel like that drove you to become a doctor and then get into politics later?
Uh, I think, yeah, I mean, I had come out of my experience in the anti-war movement, which was really the anti-Vietnam War movement, which was really my first activism. That and actually the civil rights movement, so those things kind of came together, um, and I sort of dealt with those challenges by deciding, I was going to be a psychiatrist, and I really thought, we had to really understand the inner origins of our social crises. And I had great hopes that, psychotherapy was going to be how we address that. But then, when I got to college, I just began to see, well, it's not, it is that it's our own internal stuff, but there's a lot of external stuff here too that we got to deal with. Um, and I think what happened on that psychedelic journey was just having my battery really charged up to, to be an actor and not to be feeling like I was a victim or, locked in passivity. There was another transformative experience for me that I should mention, which is that I had a life-threatening, um, not exactly an illness. I tore a blood vessel in my brain. I had what's called a
Wow.
carotid dissection when I was 41. And it looked like I wasn't going to make it. Um, and Or if I did, I would be completely paralyzed on one side of my body. And I had a dissection on the left side, which completely choked off all blood flow to the left side of my brain. But I was really lucky because I happened to have this, what's called a collateral, that connected the blood flow from the right side of my brain to the left. So I didn't die and I
Mm.
didn't even have a stroke. But I sure had really bad headaches and a lot of pain going up inside my head. And when it was finally diagnosed and I went into hospital, I was sure that was it, and I just wanted to meditate and make my peace and say goodbye. And, but then it never happened, and in fact, then the blood vessel opened up again. It eventually rechanneled. It gets filled with clot, and then it can rechannel, and that actually happened. Um, but there was about, at least 2 weeks in there where it looked like there was zero possibility that I was going to survive that. And during that time in my meditations, looking out on the 10th floor of Massachusetts General Hospital, at this beautiful view of the moon and the river, the Charles River, for me, it was an incredibly spiritual experience where I sort of made a pact, with the universe that if I was allowed to survive, I was going to make it up, and I was going to do my part. I was going to make it, I was going to do my part of the bargain. I wasn't sure what that was, but I was going to do something. And that really solidified my, you know, what should I say? That's why I did not want to be kept inside the box. And while I had a medical degree and all that, you know, that's why I got tricked into running for office, because I saw that we were just going to hell in a handbasket and doing the usual, inside the box stuff wasn't going to do it. And when I got tricked into running for office, this was just after Ralph Nader's run, which to me was also very eye-opening and empowering. It made me really want to explore how we could push the envelope in a way that just wasn't being done at all.
And fix the external world, not just one patient at a time, but on a large scale societal level.
And look at who's throwing them in, So there's this this allegory about how as a doctor you're pulling people out of the water, but instead of just pulling people out of the water, you have to go upstream and look at who and what is actually throwing them into the river to start with.
Wow. Yeah. So you sort of gained a more big picture mode of action from that experience. In 41, you had this near-death experience, basically, and coming back and made this pact with the universe that you're going to try to help. Is that, do you feel like that's the main thing that got you to shift from medical practice to like political practice?
I would not have had kind of the courage to sort of defy the usual paradigm. It's like once you've gone to the trouble of developing a medical career, usually people don't walk away in the middle of that. And I felt like it wasn't walking away, it was walking to, to a higher place. But I had always struggled with that, and I wasn't sure, how I could enlarge, my action beyond kind of the office, the doctor's office in a rather routine way. And at that point, I found myself getting more and more involved in kind of public policy around healthcare and especially environmental health. At that time, we were looking at a whole new epidemic of asthma in kids. It didn't exist. Few people understand that now. You had to have grown up in the 50s and 60s to know that asthma wasn't a thing, especially in kids. Now it is, all over the place. We're looking at asthma and, diabetes and obesity and developmental disabilities and childhood cancers and things that just weren't there before were now suddenly there. And I was really interested in why is that happening? Our genes didn't change overnight. Why is this happening? And that kept pointing to bigger system issues.
Wow. So so you sort of made the transition from medicine into politics, not just like a jump from one career into another. It was almost like an evolution from health on an individual level to sort of a public health perspective of what's going on. Why are people getting sick like this? And then trying to influence the policies around that. And then that's sort of what got you into the political sphere.
Yeah, I mean, the way I used to summarize it was I used to practice clinical medicine, and then I moved to political medicine because politics is the mother of all illnesses. And if we're going to fix what's actually killing us, literally, we have to deal with these larger social and political issues.
Wow. And you mentioned that you got tricked into running for office. I've heard you say that before on the Breakfast Club, but I don't know how did you get tricked into running for office? What happened there?
Let's see. So I had just been active in Ralph Nader's campaign and discovered a very empowering politics that was people powered, that was grassroots, that was not dictated by billionaires and corporations. And it was really kind of intoxicating to like discover what could go on there. And it also brought together all these groups that you usually didn't see working together. You know, the Black community, and the Black Power community. Actually, Mel King, who was one of the leaders of this movement here in the Boston and Massachusetts area, and he was part of that campaign. And labor was part of that campaign, and the environmental movement, and the public health movement. It became such a unifying campaign. And at that point, I was then approached after that campaign by the Green Party in my home state, by members of the party saying, you know, do you want to think about running for governor in Massachusetts? Just do what you've already been doing as a public health and environmental advocate, as a peace advocate. Just do the same thing, but call it a campaign for governor and reach a broader, a broader group of people. And that's how I got tricked, thinking that you could just sort of move from advocacy into the political world. And it turned, I wouldn't, knowing what I was getting into, I never would have done it had I not been tricked into it. But then once I had done that first run and had a team of people who more or less knew how to handle the press, how to deal with, fundraising, messaging, etc. It seemed like, wow, this is a powerful tool. It's not fair to just drop it, So I kept going. But yeah, that's how I got tricked.
Yeah, that's a great story. I want to get into some policy issues about specific things like universal health care, money in politics, things like that. Um, I think we have about a half an hour left. Is that about right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that looks
Okay.
fine.
So let's go through some of these policies with a little bit of more rapid cadence, because I also want to get to propaganda, misinformation, and stuff, and I want to get deep into that. So let's go through some of the policy stuff a little more quickly. And this has been wonderful. This first part of our conversation to like learn more about you in this way, all these things that I didn't know. I'm fascinated, and you just becoming more human to me. It's a really helpful way to learn about somebody, to understand where they came from and how they evolved. So the first thing I want to jump into is universal healthcare, because I think it relates to what we were talking about before, empathy, having empathy and compassion for people. I also, when we were talking about psychedelics, it reminded me of a trip that I had where I realized that the chemicals that are in our brains completely affect our ability to do things, our ability to function, our ability to take care of ourselves, and also just our perspective, our point of view, the things that we do, the things that we think, the things that we believe. It affects everything, and that different people have different chemicals, and that there are some people that just can't take care of themselves. They can't work, they can't function in a career, and they're just they need help. And I think that to me, that is like the foundation of my perspective in terms of why I believe I actually had been registered libertarian, I think, before that experience. And then that along with some other things shifted me toward the Green Party, because I realized that, the libertarian ideal of everybody for themselves, everybody should take care of themselves, and self-reliance and all that. That's a nice theory, but not everybody can do that. So, and some people need help. So, I guess my question to you about universal health care is, why do we not have that already?
Yeah, I mean, that is the obvious question. And let me just answer that simply to say this is a symptom of this political disease, that our policies are dictated by powerful special interests who mostly stay the course. So, we are the only, wealthy, developed nation around the world that does not provide some kind of universal health care. Healthcare would be far cheaper Our costs would go way down. We waste so much money right now on paper pushing and red tape in order to maintain this elaborate private bureaucracy of health insurance. It is wasteful. It eats up 1 out of every 3 healthcare dollars. We could, massively cut our healthcare costs if we had a single payer type Medicare for all system. The American people want this, and it is a symptom of our very toxic, predatory political system that it will deny us over and over again. This is part of the reason I can't be a Democrat, because they will not support it. They support it when they're out of office, but when they have the majority in the legislature, then they will find ways to stop it. So,
Well,
yeah,
Bernie would probably support it, right? Even though he's in the Democrat Party right now.
there are good people within the Democratic Party, but they will be cut off at the pass. They will be sabotaged anytime they get into real positions of power.
Yeah. And I guess, do you think that that's because of the money in politics issue, where the insurance companies are just putting so much money into lobbying and things like that? Is that what kills it?
Yeah, and also big pharma.
Mm.
Huge amounts of money come from big pharma. Yeah,
So,
and so you have a political system which is basically bought and paid for. So
mm,
you have, it's much like the American people, by majority, not only oppose the genocide, also oppose the provision of weapons in order to commit the genocide in Gaza, but the Congress won't touch it. The number of people who will vote on behalf of the American people, you can count on practically one hand, and the same is true on healthcare.
yeah. I remember that you had been talking in the Breakfast Club about something that happened in Massachusetts, where there was a referendum to get money out of politics, and at least in the local level or something, and that the Democrats killed the vote, even though it passed the referendum, and they killed the vote with a simple voice vote.
With a
Can you
voice
just
vote.
elaborate on that a little bit? Because I tried to look into that and I couldn't find what you were talking about.
So it was called the Clean Elections Law. It was passed by referendum in 1998 by a more than 60% majority. So it was like passed 2-1. And we had a very broad coalition of labor, healthcare, environment, African American, racial justice, you name it. A huge coalition that was pushing for it, and the legislature refused to move it. They would kind of hem and haw and try to lead you on, pretending that, oh, maybe next year they'll pass it. This is like a classic technique. And they wouldn't pass it. So finally we went to a referendum, and it passed overwhelmingly. And it basically provided at all levels of state government. Did it apply? It did not apply at the presidential level, but I think it applied to congressional candidates as well. That public money would be provided to these candidates. And let me just say that if you also couple that with media reform, so that you ensure that the public airwaves are open for public purpose, then you can drastically cut the costs of elections. So this is actually doable. Mexico, I should mention, has this. They don't have public funding, but they have strict campaign contribution limits. It's a high limit, but they have a limit. We don't have any limits at all at the at the national level. And they have media reform, so that there's a level playing field. You cannot buy media in Mexico. This is how it is that the current very popular president was elected, and AMLO before her. Mexico totally changed their politics after 100 years of basically neoliberal rule. They changed because they had these fundamental political reforms. We could have that too. And that's what we did with the Clean Elections Law, and it was sabotaged by the Democrats, which was just before I decided to run for office as a not Democrat, because it was really clear to me that if in the most progressive, allegedly Democratic Party in the whole country, if they are sabotaging the overarching problem here, the corrupting influence of money in politics, if they are sabotaging the solution to that, they're not going to fix this. And I'm sorry to say, but that conclusion has been borne out in the 25 years since that became clear.
Why do you think that they're so against getting money out of politics? And I know that, people talk about corruption and things like that, but um, is it just that? Is it just greed that they like to get the money from the people that are paying them, or is there something beyond that?
That's a pretty powerful force. Greed, I'm sorry to say, is classically the at the root of corruption, and it's fundamentally a very corrupt political system that has been bought and paid for. Is a pay-to-play system. Donald Trump is an example of that, but so too was Kamala Harris. Which is why, to me, it wasn't a choice of one or the other, because they both maintain the system that is taking us all down. But Donald Trump, I mean, it's hysterical what the numbers say about him. He had 10 people who contributed 44% of all the money funding him, came from 10 people. Now, Kamala Harris herself had a record number of billionaire contributors. So, that's who's calling the shots, that's who's running these parties. And it is a very powerful and pervasive force throughout all the policy making. There was a famous study by so-called Gillens and Page that came out maybe 12 years ago. It's never been improved upon. And it basically showed that there's almost a 0% connection between the public's priorities and what the Congress and the White House, for that matter, actually do. They do where the big money is, and where people are is basically, goes into the dustbin, which is why people are, distraught right now. A recent study done by Harvard on youth found that half of young people consider the future hopeless, and a full 25% of young people have considered ending their own lives within the last 2 weeks of the poll, because of how absolutely desolate and hopeless things appear to be. So this is not a course we can sustain on,
Wow.
in every dimension.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue into what I want to talk about for pretty much the rest of the conversation, which is misinformation, disinformation, and media propaganda. And the reason I think it's a good segue is because you're talking about kids being so depressed at what they're seeing that they are contemplating suicide. And of course, this may be, that they're seeing reality. Maybe they're seeing really the democracy is crumbling. There's the court system is being ignored by the executive branch, like things like that. Maybe there is some reality to it. But I think that there is also a lot of propaganda from both sides. And for example, CNN, Fox News, things like that, where one side will make it seem like the world is the sky is falling when there's a Democrat in office, and the other side will make it seem like the sky is falling when there's a Republican office, and then they just keep flipping that way. I used to think that Fox News was propaganda and CNN was basically real reporting until at the last election cycle. I started seeing when Trump went on Rogan, for example, on Joe Rogan, and was talking about how he was being taken out of context. And I went and actually watched the videos of him being talking about, for example, that if there were no tariffs, then, or if he didn't fix the tariffs, then there would be a bloodbath for the auto industry in the United States, and because the Japanese auto industry would just win. And but of course, CNN was saying Trump says there will be a bloodbath if he loses, and leaving out the context that it was about the auto industry, not about like a revolution or some kind of insurrection. So that was when I started realizing that actually CNN is also propaganda. And then when I saw Kamala and even Barack Obama, who I had very much supported, especially Obama, I didn't see the negatives at the time. I only saw the positives. Um, when the two of them were campaigning, they were kept repeating the bloodbath thing. That Trump is saying that it's going to be a bloodbath if he loses, but meanwhile, like for already a long time, it had been clear. Like Trump had clarified on Joe Rogan to millions of people, he was talking about the auto industry, and it was clear from the video that that's the case. So that's when I started realizing that I didn't actually know what was going on, and that the things that I thought I knew were probably a product of propaganda that I've been exposed to for decades since I was a kid. And that sort of threw me into this little, like a little bit of an existential crisis of what is going on in the United States right now. I don't know. I don't understand what's even going on in the world. And that, I think that is what is driving me to create the upcoming meditation magazine issue that we're creating right now. It's about how do we know what's really going on in this world of propaganda and misinformation, and if we don't know, then we can't take a stand against things. We can't take a stand for things or against things because we don't know what's real. And like you were saying, you grew up Jewish, I grew up Jewish. We have this ethic of we need to take a stand if something bad is happening. And I have that feeling I need to take a stand, something bad is happening. But then I'm also like, wait, do I even know what's going on? Is something bad happening? Is it as bad as they make it seem? Or is this propaganda? And so that's where I want to go with the rest of this conversation. And I want to start with the question, where do you get your news from and how do you know that it's real?
So this is the first point that I wanted to make in response to this question about, how do we ever really know what's going on? And I think you never really know forever and for final. It's a process. It's a process of, ensuring that you're informed, which is not easy to do. But fortunately, there is independent media out there, and there are different slants in the independent media. But, I was going to rattle off some news sources, which I think are really important. I don't go through a day without having consulted my, 5 or 6 different news sources. I usually start with Democracy Now, democracynow.org, which is good, but tends to have a sort of Democratic Party bias and often doesn't give the full spectrum of options out there, especially politically. The Intercept, Drop Site News, Useful Idiots, Breaking Points, which is a great podcast that actually has Crystal Ball, who's like the progressive, and then a kind of Sagar Enjeti, his name is, a journalist with a kind of right-wingish view, but anti-corporate at that. And they're always debating with each other. And those are just some of the basics. And I find that did I name the Intercept? I find that helpful.
Yeah.
Aaron Mate, so-called Useful Idiots, which is a great podcast with Katie Halper, Glenn Greenwald, and Consortium News, I should mention. In disclosure, I am on their board. There are really great journalists out there who are, one of them, Chris Hedges. If the mainstream media is making war on them, you can be sure they have a really important and powerful message. I don't listen to, the New York Times, CNN, MSNBC. It's really toxic. It's poisonous. It really is very confusing. I don't even listen to them to like have a sense of the spectrum. I do listen to PBS NewsHour just to see what the mainstream media is reporting, but they have their biases for sure. I don't find them useful. They're
So
useful just to know what's going on,
for
but
the
those also,
sources that
yeah.
that you do listen to, how do you know that they are unbiased, or maybe they are biased, but how do you know that they're giving you reality rather than maybe they're getting their news from somewhere else that's biased? You know what I mean?
That's exactly why you can't just listen to one. I truly try to get a sense of the spectrum of reporting, and then you have to see what really makes sense and what is presented in a compelling way. Now that you have fake AI videos and stuff like that, you have to be even more cautious. But you know,
Hi,
the
Katie.
conventional, yeah, yeah, that's Willie. You'll see him often.
Mhm.
He's trying to get in the camera view
Yeah.
constantly. Um, but there was this fake footage of supposedly Hamas shooting people at the feeding uh, sites,
Hmm.
and that turned out to be fake footage that showed these gangs, which are actually subsidized by the Israeli occupation forces. And that was somewhere else. They are not the ones who are murdering people by, by the dozens, by the scores at these feeding sites, these absolutely horrific massacres that are taking place, where hungry people are on the verge of death and they're trying to feed their families and they're getting killed. Well over, I think, 160 people now in the last week or two, this outrage that's going on. And there's fake footage that's being used. And I saw PBS NewsHour was showing that fake footage, even after it had long been identified as footage that comes from somewhere else. So, you have to be skeptical of whatever you're seeing. And, even from the independent sources, although after a while, you kind of begin to learn who you can trust and who is not, they are not getting accolades. They are not getting paid. Chris Hedges was, a lot of the best journalists have been fired. They have been fired over and over again. It's a real sign of integrity that they don't change their story, and they don't sell out and they find ways to survive. Usually it's Substack and they get public support. But I think it takes having long-term, you want to watch this stuff and just watchdog it and try to get a sample. I find social media extremely toxic, especially since Elon Musk has, bought out Twitter. It's a real, hotbed of pathology, but it is a great place to see stuff critiqued. And, I spend way too much time reading Twitter just to see a huge diversity of opinion. And that's where I really, see what the right wing is saying. And usually it's full of crap and you don't have to read very much of it, to know. And likewise, I would say the Democrats are, often there's a grain of truth to what they're saying, but they present it in a way that's very distorted. And that makes it out like, oh, it's Trump and the Republicans that are the only problem here. The cuts that Trump and the GOP are trying to make now, some 15 million people from Medicaid and huge numbers from food assistance and then Medicare cuts. Well, Joe Biden actually had much bigger cuts when he closed off the expansions of Medicare and Medicaid, the expansions of Medicaid. That was 24 million people who got cut off when he terminated the Medicaid expansion. And likewise, same thing on food stamps. So the Democrats have done worse, actually, than what the Republicans are about to do in terms of social supports. And the cuts to Medicare, which could be huge, it could be $500 billion that will be cut from Medicare. It will be just staggering. But that happens because the Democrats passed a ruling in 2010 when they had the majority. The Democrats passed this so-called pay-go rule that triggers these enormous cuts to Medicare. So don't trust the MSNBCs and the CNNs to tell you the full story, or the Democrats for that matter. They will give you a story that makes it look like it's all the Republicans. It's not. It is a duopoly, and it's like, people have not been voting for them. They've been voting against the one that they hate the most. And it's time, I think, to stop voting against what we hate and to start voting for what we believe. Forget the lesser evil. We have to fight for the greater good.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. I think we only have about 13 minutes. Is that right? Or do you have any flexibility at the end of that, or maybe a few minutes?
I do. Yeah, I do. If there's more to be said.
Okay. Yeah. We'll try to speed up the cadence right now. I want to. You just mentioned that there's where people vote against what they hate, and there's a duopoly. And I like your opinion and your perspective that we should have third parties that gain power, and we should vote for what we actually believe in. But in this last election cycle, even though I like you and your policies at the best, I voted for Kamala because I thought that Trump could be a threat to democracy in the way that there won't be more elections in the future, and it won't matter, or there will be elections, but they'll really be fixed like what we see in other countries, so maybe in Venezuela or Cuba or Russia or places like that. So my when I talked to Marianne Williamson a few weeks ago, I had a really interesting conversation with her. She really felt like the sky is falling in terms of Trump is going to be the end of American democracy. and we need to stand up to stop that from happening, and we're going to move into a period of fascism and dictatorship. Do you agree with that, or do you think that this is just another administration with somebody that you disagree with, and that's part of the duopoly?
I feel that desperate about both of the parties, and Trump can do what he does because he's had the Democrats lay the groundwork for him, and in fact, it's such a poisoned and propagandized conversation because the number of people who aren't voting, who reject both parties, is actually enough to win the election. It's more than 1/3 of people who stay home and refuse to vote for either of the corporate candidates being rammed down their throats. So, there actually is there is the people power to overcome fascism. We're seeing it out in the street right now. And unfortunately, the Democrats, the sold out corporate Democrats, will not inspire people to come out and vote. They won't. And when people voted for Trump, they weren't voting for him, they were voting against the Democrats. So how exactly do you ever fix this problem then? By advancing the Democrats, who keep pushing people to vote more in the Republican camp. And we saw more of that in this election than we've ever seen before. So this is not a solvable problem within the box of the duopoly. We need a politics of integrity. And let me also say that we could have ranked choice voting right now. You could have more than two choices. Who denies you that choice? It's usually the Democrats who prevent us from having ranked choice voting and who basically stop it in its tracks. We could have ranked choice voting, and they don't want it. They fight it tooth and nail because then they would actually have competition from a real politics of integrity. They only want to fight the Republicans and be just a shade better than them. So they have, they will control this political system so that it will never be solved. And your ultimate issue could be the elections. But, there are a million ultimate issues out there, including the potential for nuclear war or to be funding genocide. There are just so many no-go examples of public policy from both the Republicans and the Democrats where they lay groundwork for each other. We're not going to solve this crisis inside of that duopoly box.
Okay, so briefly, do you feel that Trump is worse than the Democrats, or that this current administration is worse? And because they go pretty much the opposite of your policies that you support. And if it's worse, then is it worth trying to stop them from happening, or you feel like it's just better to get out of the box?
The question you want to ask is, what pathway is consistent with our survival, with our getting out of here alive? Neither the Democrats or Republicans are. You could say, oh, well, the Democrats are a shade better on this policy. And they might be, but they're driving working people away from the voting booth and into the hands of the Republican Party.
Yeah.
So they are not a solution.
That makes sense. I guess to me, it sort of depends on how you see the current leaders, right? Trump and you could say Elon, whether you see them as just another politician who's just going to be bad for another 4 years, or if you see them as potentially like evil dictator types. Do you see them as trying to make the country better in their own warped way? Or do you see, or it may be legitimate in some people's eyes, or do you think that they're actually just power hungry and trying to take over?
I think they are absolutely dangerous tools of oligarchy and empire. But sadly, the Democrats are too. And I don't think they have, our interests at heart either. I don't see either of them as solving this crisis. And I think you don't want to spend too much time trying to split those hairs. Neither of these are pathways out of here alive. And there is the potential right now in voters, the numbers of voters who are divorcing both of these parties is huge. There was a poll that just came out last week, I think it was done by CNN, that showed 80% of Americans now say they want government to do more, and that the leadership of neither party is capable of doing it. So there is critical mass right now to do the right thing, but we keep being talked into, becoming our own worst enemy, and into sabotaging ourselves and sabotaging the the pathway forward. We need an
Yeah.
independent, people-powered path forward, and there are many ways to build that, and
So
that
yeah,
happen.
yeah, I agree. I think that a lot of people want the government to do more, and I think one of the reasons that you can see some polls say that Trump is very unpopular. Some are showing that he's relatively popular. Half the country voted for him, and it's
Well,
strange to us, maybe.
but that it's not half, because more
Oh,
than
right,
one-third were not voting to start with. So there was a
right.
quorum that was not voting at all, more than the numbers
Of
who.
course, of course. So not half of the country, but a lot of people, or maybe half of the voters, or approximately half of the people who actually voted for Trump. And I think that partly is because he gets things done, and I
No,
disagree with a lot
no,
of the
no.
things that he
Actually,
gets done.
what the numbers support,
Mm,
the people who voted for Trump were lower income and not educated. The
mm,
people who are being thrown under the bus, and the people who voted for Trump largely rejected the Democratic Party because they gave us the Wall Street bailouts. They gave us 7-8 million people who lost their homes to foreclosure. They gave us NAFTA. So there's enormous ill will that's been built up for the Democrats over the years because of what they do. So the Democrats are not the party that's going to fix this for us, and they just drive people into the camp of the Republicans. So you don't want to be their patsy here by saying these are the two solutions that the billionaires allow us to have. So pick one. No, I'm picking something different, which
yeah.
is actually what people are demanding and supporting.
Right. Yeah. So since we only have a few more minutes left, I want to go a little bit quickly here on some of these other issues. Um, One of the things that Trump is getting done right now is something that personally I think is I disagree with, which is deporting a lot of people, and then also getting rid of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. To me, I see this as possibly being driven by racism, or failing of empathy, where they separate families, like children from their mothers. Really, to me, very disturbing and distressing, and something that the Democrats wouldn't have done. But I won't get back into that.
But
Probably, maybe they would.
wait.
Hmm.
Remember, the Democrats are still holding the record for mass deportations under Obama.
Oh, okay.
So the PR says that, oh, the Democrats don't do this. No, it doesn't get promoted, and it doesn't really get watchdogged the way it's happening under Trump. Thank
Do
goodness.
you
But
do you
yeah, his
think
numbers
that
are way below what Obama did.
Yeah, do you think that and that's actually really great context and really important, and like I didn't hear about that under Obama, and now I'm hearing about it all the time under Trump, so it is an interesting difference. I wonder if it was done differently. Maybe they didn't do separation of families during the Obama administration. I don't know.
Oh,
Maybe they did.
they
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 did.
did. They had child separations. Absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes. So,
Oh,
to me, when I see this, I feel like there's like a lack of empathy, and maybe there's some kind of racism. But do you see any real reason for these policies aside from these sort of dark motivations? Like, do you have any kind of perspective where you see that there's some kind of logic to it, or do you think that it's really just like racism, nationalism, and things like that?
it's racism, nationalism, and it's also the use of scapegoats to try to distract from the real problem. The real problem is that working people have been thrown under the bus by the billionaires running the country. Jobs, housing, all the things that people complain about and want to blame on migrants. Actually, migrants build the economy. In fact, there is majority support right now for migrants and opposition to Trump's migration, the way that he's handling migration. There's a lot of resentment, which has been ginned up by Democrats as well as Republicans against migrants. And this was one of the things about the Kamala Harris campaign. She was very anti-immigrant and scapegoating. And the reality is that migrants are huge contributors to our culture and to our economy and to the bottom line. So this is a kind of hatred that has really been ginned up by both political parties, and they're
Mhm.
both very much culpable here. There's no reason for it fundamentally. Yes, we have at times had a big problem with lots of people pouring over the border. But let's deal with what's driving people over the border. That's largely US foreign policy, regime change operations. It's predatory corporate hijack of various economies. We overthrew Aristide in Haiti twice. That was the U.S. overthrow. We overthrow democracies like handing out candy at Christmas. It's been something like 70 or 80 governments that we've overthrown since the Second World War. So
Yeah.
there's no reason for this. We could fix the migrant problem by providing people at the border, to actually, do the paperwork at that time, instead of saying, well, come on in, and 5 years from now, we'll get to your case. This could be found out by putting our resources not into building a wall, which is extremely destructive, doesn't keep people out, it just kills people on their way. And it's also very destructive to the environment and ecosystems and so on. Instead of pouring money into militarizing the border, we could be putting money into a humane policy. But let's fix the drug crisis, which is, U.S. prohibition. Let's fix the drug crisis and the cartels and the violence and the economic overthrows and the sanctions that we impose on Nicaragua and Cuba, for example, and Venezuela, and which drive millions of people here out of economic desperation. We can deal with this crisis in very productive and humane ways. To think that all we can do is throw immigrants out and separate families and target people who are essential infrastructure for our communities, that is just wrong. And that is a fallacy being perpetrated by both Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah. And there was, I think that the urgency of the deportations, from what I understood from watching Elon and Trump, was that there was a claim that the Democrats under Biden and others had been importing essentially immigrants to swing states in order to make them forever blue. Do you think that there's any truth to that, or is that just made up crazy propaganda?
I don't think that's true, but even if it were, it's such a tiny footnote on these larger trends. We know that millions of farmers are put out of business below the border because of drought, because of climate change. We know that people were flocking here from El Salvador and Guatemala and Honduras, from the countries where we had conducted regime change operations. We create chaos south of the border. And then we criminalize people who are fleeing in desperation the murderous foreign policies that we've inflicted on them. That is crazy. And we shouldn't be talked into putting our blinders on here. There are humane, decent, and holistic solutions that are win-win for everybody.
Yeah. I want to talk for a moment about the economic policy of tariffs versus free trade and globalism. It's a very interesting topic. I kind of want to understand your perspective on it. That from what I've understood, from at first I thought tariffs was crazy because all the media says that they're crazy. Then I'm watching these conservative podcasts and understanding that there's, U.S. has a huge trade deficit, and China has a huge trade surplus, and that China is potentially intentionally doing that in order to be able to get all of the other countries to deindustrialize and to be able to essentially take power and be the only industrial power. Do you think that the tariffs are a reasonable idea that the current administration is pushing, or do you think that it's just part of the insanity?
I think they're doing it in entirely the wrong way. Tariffs can be an important component of an economic development policy, but a tariff alone is not going to revive your auto industry, if the auto manufacturers can't afford the healthcare and the workers can't afford their healthcare. This alone doesn't do it. You need industrial policy, and then you need a specific application of tariff with a certain country on certain things. And to just have blanket massive tariffs that come out of the blue, and beyond that, but they change. I think I saw an article the other day that Trump has changed his tariff policies 22 times in the last couple of months. So this is really bad. Just that incredible instability is very destructive, and it's especially for small businesses, which used to be the backbone of the American economy and which should be again. So this has been really, really hurtful, dumb, and it's already having a disastrous impact on our economy, but it's going to get worse. numbers.
It hurts. It hurts our magazine. It's the paper from Canada is all in flux and everything is crazy. So our costs for printing the magazine have gone up, and it makes it very difficult. We already had very slim margins, but
Yeah.
it becomes very difficult for a lot of businesses to function. I know that China is the focus of this. I think China is the bad guy in the narrative that is hey, they're gonna be able to destroy us because they can build so many more ships than we can because they have industry and we don't have industry anymore. Do
Mhm.
you think that there is truth to that? Is China like a really an evil regime, or and that they're really a threat to our way of life, or do you think that it's more propaganda that we're hearing?
This is the rule and not the exception for the US, that we will demonize whoever our leading economic competitor is. And you have to be very suspicious of that propaganda, which is drumming up war fever. We learned back in the Eisenhower days that, beware of the military industrial complex. It's hugely impactful and it's coordinated with big media. So, in my mind, that should be rejected out of hand. Um, there is the potential for us to go to nuclear war with China, as with Russia, and we will lose. We will lose right now, given the status of our, of our ammunition and our armaments, and they are way advanced over where we are in terms of missile development and the speed of the missiles and so
So
on.
do you think we should step up our development of those arms, or do you think that there's a better way to do it?
Well, I think there is a better way. Who's been leading the charge for an arms race and to destroy the international mechanisms for arms control and for phasing out nuclear weapons? Unfortunately, the U.S. has been leading that, that crazy, insane pathway. So,
Mm.
yeah, no, it's a absolute no-brainer that this can be um, this is a problem that we can fix. This is eminently fixable and it needs to be fixed
Do
fast.
you
Neither the Democrats nor the Republicans have a clue about how to conduct diplomacy. And
Do you think that these tensions between the US and China and the US and Russia, for example, are being driven mostly by the US, or do you think that they're being driven mostly by China and Russia, or do you think that it's sort of a mix of those?
well, it's always a mix, but I think there are many, many instances now where the US is really turning the crank, or where I should say our military industrial complex and big contractors are turning the crank and attempting to drum up their, as soon as we resolve one war, suddenly they come up with another hotspot. And, the whole conflict with Russia really stems from the US effort to expand NATO and nuclear weapons right up to Russia's border. So Russia is not doing anything different from what we did when we freaked out when Russian missiles came to Cuba. And by the way, Russian missiles came to Cuba because we had put US missiles in Turkey in striking distance of Moscow. So the US, since the Second World War, has been extremely aggressive. And we have a foreign policy. It doesn't keep any secrets. It's called full spectrum dominance, that the US will dominate all spheres. We need to be part of a multipolar world, working with a community of nations as adults in the room. Right now, we insist on dominating, and that's disastrous. We are losing right now, and we would lose if there was actually a conflict. So
Well,
this is absolutely deadly and dangerous. This is another reason why we need to replace the warmongering duopoly that is driven by Wall Street, its investments, and by the war machine.
clearly there's a lot of problems that the US is causing in the world, but on balance, do you feel like we, as sort of a democracy that is, trying to embody liberal values, at least on the surface, do you feel that the US is on balance a good or a bad force in the world?
We're very mixed, and we could be a very, very good force in the world. We still could do that if we will mend some of our ways. But, we are the regime change operation. We are driving and enabling the genocide in Gaza. All the hotspots around the world right now, we have really done a major part to gin up. It doesn't mean that there aren't tensions and issues that have to be resolved on both sides. There absolutely are, but we have a very aggressive, We are the world's leading manufacturer of weapons and selling weapons to anyone who will buy that. We typically arm both sides of conflicts. We are really being run by the military-industrial complex, and this is going to destroy us all.
Wow. Yeah, so for the Peace issue of Meditation Magazine last year, I interviewed Ilya Ponomarev. He's the in Ukraine. And he's actually driving the anti-Putin resistance in Russia. He said that Russia actually had a hand in training the militants that perpetrated the October 7th attacks that started the current round of horror in the Middle East, though obviously that's been going on for a long time and since way before October 7th. But do you think that that is true? Because the idea was that he was Putin was trying to get the United States attention away from Ukraine, so he's sort of stirring the pot in the Middle East. Do you think that that's true, or do you think that that's just some propaganda that's going around?
This is the first I've ever heard that one. What happened on October 7th was part of a series of hostilities that's been going on since before the Nakba. 500 Palestinian villages were destroyed, even before the Nakba, even before the declaration of independence for the state of Israel. So, the myth, as you probably know, is a land without a people and a people without a land. There was ethnic cleansing basically written into the DNA before the founding of the state of Israel. So, at some point, the Palestinians really began to push back. But historically, Christians, Jews, and Muslims lived in relative peace for millennia, certainly in Jerusalem. So, when that went to pieces, it went to pieces. It didn't take Russia. I mean, that's like ridiculous to say it's Russia. It's like, the reparations movement has also been blamed on Russia. That it's been Russians who've been planting these ideas. My campaign in 2016, I was smeared as a Russian, a useful idiot, an agent of Russia, because my ideas were like, undermining the Democratic Party or whatever. I was a Russian agent. It's like pathetic.
So
And
why would Russia push this idea of reparations? Why would that be like a Kremlin talking point, as you mentioned on the Breakfast Club?
I don't know if you've heard about Omali Yeshatila. He's a reparations advocate. He's an amazing. He's sort of an African American, strong, very strong voice for dignity and respect for African Americans, and has been a strong proponent of reparations. So he was just recently taken to court and threatened with 15 years in jail as a Russian agent. Why? Because he promoted reparations.
Why would Russia promote reparations? Like, I don't understand the motivation there.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't make any sense at all. It doesn't.
Could it be because the trillions of dollars would sort of bankrupt the United States, or do you think that's the motivation?
Yes, exactly. I mean, it would take that level of thinking that, reparations. Well, I think the main thing was that reparations was being used by Russia to make Black people rebel.
To create divisions.
It took Russian interference to instigate the discontent of African Americans, which is like, Black people need Russians to tell them that they're being screwed.
Well, obviously, there's a history with the slavery and the African Americans being oppressed in this country. And they don't need the Russia to create discontent. But just like with the United States regime change operations, where they would go in and exacerbate tensions that were already there, theoretically, it could be something similar coming from Russia. Do you think that Russia does operate in that way? Do you think that they are kind of sneaky and evil sort of in that way, or do you think that that's also just American propaganda, like projecting our regime change ways onto Putin and Russia?
So, I think in theory, all of this is possible, and all, you know, nation states, especially big ones, are looking for ways to press their advantage. I don't think that's unrealistic at all. But I haven't seen evidence of that level of interference, and Russia doesn't have a lot of money to spare. So I don't think so. I
Wow.
don't think Russia is, and there's been a lot of, investigations about Russian social media and so on. A lot was made out of some minuscule number of social media tweets that were said, oh, Russia is trying to help my campaign by pointing out that maybe third parties would be a good thing. But those are so tiny. And they say, oh, there were thousands of them. Yeah, but there are like billions of messages on social media every day. They just play with the numbers and they destroy them. This is not coming. There's no evidence that Russia is playing a major role here in instigating the resistance of Palestinians. Give me a break.
Hmm.
That is
Yes.
so
Yeah, and what you had mentioned about the Russians, that that there was an allegation against your campaign that the Russians were trying to help you and to help you win. I remember you said on the Breakfast Club, it was very interesting that you mentioned the New Knowledge Corporation, which was the one that said that you were being helped by a Russian influence campaign,
media.
was
Yeah.
also caught in Alabama running a
Impressed.
fake
Yes.
Russian influence campaign for a
Yes.
congressional or against a congressional candidate. So, do you think that they were like paid by the Democrat Party, or like what do you think that what was up there? What happened there?
So this is well documented in the New York Times. You can
Mhm.
Google it. You can Google the New Knowledge Corporation in the New York Times. And it was a special election for Senate where um, Democrats actually funded this. They funded New Knowledge to create this fake Russian influence campaign, which was exposed in order to disparage the Republican candidate. So Democrats were using a fake Russian interference campaign on social media in order to make the Republican look bad so that they would win the election. And they
Yeah.
did.
Wow. So these types of psychological operations that you call psyops, I think that to
Yeah,
me that is the epitome of propaganda, misinformation, disinformation. It's the epitome of mind control and making it so that we don't know what's going on. If I'm looking at
right.
oh, hey, I see these posts from Russian accounts that are supporting Joe Stein or that are against that are supporting this Republican candidate in Alabama. If I start seeing those, of course, I'm going to think like this is Russia supporting this. But then to even know that that's fake, you have to have some
Right.
kind of crazy investigative work where they find out that this corporation is behind it. So it really brings me back to how do we even know anything? How do we know that
Yeah.
anything is real if even the primary sources like the posts on social media can be fake?
Yes, and especially nowadays in the days of AI, where the posts and the video and the voice, to me, this gets to kind of the overarching issue here, which is that there's been a complete breakdown of trust and integrity in our society. And we cannot function like this. It's not as though this can't be solved. This isn't rocket science, but we need to be able to have rules and policy that ensure trust and ensure integrity. And that can be done. We can regulate social media like it is a public utility. We can, um, you know, we can stop the upward theft of wealth from working people into the hands of billionaires who then become basically political rulers like Elon Musk did, like Donald Trump is with the money of 10 super billionaires. We cannot have a society that's run by money. It really needs to be a society based on our values, our relationship, love, respect, decency, and that is there. It is being kind of covered over by the incredible greed and corruption of the economic and political system. And these things have to be solved together. Like in
Yeah.
the words of Louis Brandeis, we have a choice between vast concentrations of wealth or a democracy. We need to get back to a democracy. We need to unconcentrate wealth,
Mm.
and ensure that everyone has kind of an equal, not just an equal shot, but really equal justice here for
Yeah.
a world that works for all of us. And
Well,
it takes a lot of us doing that, and it's in all of our hands. We are not powerless, and resistance is not futile. That is what they want us to think. But these problems are solvable by us if we work together. And that's where, politics is a coalition of people who agree to work together for the long haul to demand and to create an America and a world that works for all of
yeah.
us.
Well, until we have that, until we have a great society where we have truth in social media and media, which blows my mind that that could even be possible, but hopefully that will be the case eventually. What do we do in the meantime? Regular people who are reading our magazine, who are watching this, what can we do to see through the lies, see through the psyops, which can be so sneaky and insidious? What can we do as individuals to see the truth?
I think, what we were talking about earlier really gets to the heart of the matter. In addition to like knowing your own truth and having those quiet spaces yourself to recharge your battery and, to kind of know where you're coming from and to see reality more clearly. Sorry, my screen just shifted here. Why did it do that? I have lost you. Are you
Well,
still there?
yeah, I can see you and you're visible. So
All
just don't
right.
worry about it for a moment.
I would look at my
Mhm.
blank screen here.
Yeah.
Um, uh, I think reading multiple media sources,
Hmm.
knowing what is the money behind any point of view, and that includes the media. Where, you know, is your media source reliable and who funds them?
Mm.
And likewise, hear different political points of view. And
Yeah.
I think it's really important. It's hard to know what your options are if you're not actually hearing about them. So I think it's really good to listen to an independent, people-powered political party or a candidate. Join my social media,
Yeah.
Dr. Jill Stein, Dr. No period. I'm mostly on Twitter just because it's really hard to be on more than one at a
Yeah, and
time.
it's a wild west out there in X.
Oh, it is, and
Yeah.
don't read X, read selected accounts on
Mm.
X, but, don't get distracted into doom scrolling, which you can't help but do.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah,
So
so definitely survey the field and then make informed choices, but hear them. Don't subject yourself just to CNN and, Fox or
yeah.
MSNBC. Don't listen to them. I think it's better to tune them out entirely.
Yeah, yeah. And you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, and this is kind of where I want to wrap up. This is my last question: is when we can't really the limits of human knowledge are finite. We cannot fully know something 100%. We always kind of exist in this some level of an uncertainty and gray area. So you, Dr. Stein, Jill, you're amazing at being so confident and knowing what you're talking about and being confident in your positions. I had the same experience with Marianne Williamson, this very strong confidence and conviction. But as you said, we can't really know things 100%. So how do you stand so confidently and courageously and steadfast in your positions if you know that there is some uncertainty about your own knowledge of things?
It's kind of in the scheme of things, how much uncertainty, on really critical positions. And, I know that, I need to breathe clean air and eat healthy food. Yeah, there's some uncertainty about that, but I mostly have learned how to navigate, your air you can't control, but, to some extent, if you have resources, you can, to some extent, eat healthier food and, not food that's going to make you sick. And, it's kind of a relative thing. And that's why I think it's really important to have a healthy and nourishing media habit and a political information habit. And I don't take stands on things that I don't understand. And, when you've lived as long as I have, you've had a lot of time to do some deep investigations. And so, I have run for office many times, and I started in the year 2002. That was my first race. So I did not have confidence in a lot of issues at the time at all. But after running for office for 15 years, you begin to build a body of knowledge. It's one of my hopes is to, I have this PowerPoint file that accumulates the evidence and helps lay out what are the arguments on a lot of these really critical issues. And, I think it's a resource I'm hoping to be able to share at some point more broadly.
Can you send
Because
that to me and I can we can distribute it to our audience?
Sure. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll buff it up a little bit, but it's got resources, and so on. Yeah, no, that would be wonderful. I'll put it
Thank
in a
you.
digestible form.
Yeah,
Um,
wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. We've gone over our time. I just want to ask you if there's one, can we ask one question from the audience that is, I think, a great way to wrap up here. So I'm going to put this up on the screen in case you can see it. I don't know if you can see it. It's from Harry. He said, we talk about politicians being bad, but isn't the system ultimately designed so? Realistically, how long do you think it would take to truly revamp government?
So let me give Mexico as an example, because this isn't just a hypothetical. And like Mexico is not a perfect place, but there is huge public support right now for oh God, I forget her name, but the president right now has
Claudia
about,
something?
yeah, Claudia Scheinbaum. Thank you.
Yeah.
She's
Hmm.
got, I think, a 70 or 80% public support. She was elected with 60% support, and twice as much as the conservative opponent had, and that happened over a course of about 12 years. And their political party, called Morena, is a people-powered political party. And they implemented, well, actually, before they came to power, what enabled them to come to power was passing campaign finance reform and putting limits on the corrupting power of money in their elections and creating open media so that you can't buy media. And boy, did they have a dramatic change really fast. So stuff, it's not going to all get fixed at once, but I think we can make critical changes to like where we have healthcare as a human right and to where we can afford a place to live. And young people don't feel helpless and like the world is, shooting them down, which they do feel right now. And, millions and millions of them are in unstoppable student debt. We can fix critical things and make this a very livable world. We can transform our world, I'm convinced, within a year, but we need a political, we need to get together. We already have the power. And let me finish with three quotes, okay? One is from Frederick Douglass, who says, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. That's where an independent political party comes in. It's got to bring the demand to the table. Without that demand, it's not going to happen. By asking nicely, it's not going to happen. It never has and it never will. So that's one thing. The second thing is Alice Walker, who said the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. We actually do have the power. And then to finish that, Malcolm X said, we're not outnumbered, we're just out-organized. We do have the numbers, we have the values, we have the solutions. What we need, the critical missing factor, is just the organization to be able to leverage the power that we do have, the power and the vision. So
Thank you so much for that inspiring way to wrap up our conversation today, Dr. Jill Stein. Thank you so much for being here. I feel very enlightened from our conversation today. I also have so many more questions. Maybe we'll get to talk again in the future. And
sounds
I hope,
great.
I hope that that your revolution works. I hope that the Green Party does eventually get elected, or maybe you or somebody in the future. Who knows how long it will take to actually take down the duopoly. But thank you for what you're doing. You're making the world a better place, and I appreciate you.
Likewise.
I hope you have a great day today. See you later.
Thank you so much.